A Russian port is evacuated after a devastating fire in Tuapse, and Moscow increases tensions by threatening Romania. The alert gained strength this Wednesday, April 29, 2026, because two events are happening together. Russia sees a strategic oil facility burning in the Black Sea while trying to turn drones falling on Romanian territory into a message against a NATO nation. What happened is not an isolated incident, it's another piece of a war that is no longer confined to the Ukrainian front. It has started to hit ports, refineries, export routes, and the borders of the Western Alliance. I'll tell you all about that in a moment, but right now, you'll want to be subscribed to the channel to stay well informed. Real-time information with the highest journalistic quality and credibility standards. Milson Alvis. In Tuapse, in Russia's Krasnodar region, a new drone attack hit the city's oil facility. The region is located on the Black Sea coast and plays a direct role in Moscow's energy logistics. It was the third attack on the area in less than 2 weeks. The refinery had already suspended production since April 16 after previous damage affected its ability to transport products. Now, the new explosion has reignited local fears, spread dark smoke, and forced authorities to evacuate residents near the refinery and take them to a school. The evacuation, still limited, shows that the problem is no longer just a military issue and has started to affect the everyday lives of those who live near the complex. The image circulating from Tuapse is easy to understand. The fuel that used to finance part of the Russian war machine has become a weak point within Russia itself. Ukraine targets this type of structure because oil, ports, and refineries move money, transportation, machinery, ships, and the ability to sustain a long war. That's why when fire breaks out again in Tuapse, the message is clear. Kyiv is bringing the pressure into the Russian rear, hitting where Moscow feels it financially and in its logistics. The Russian government tried to downplay the incident. Vladimir Putin accused Ukraine of attacking civilian infrastructure and said that strikes against energy could cause environmental consequences. Even so, he stated that local authorities reported there were no major threats. The problem is that the scene in Tuapse itself weakens this statement. With heavy smoke, spilled oil, residents being evacuated, a school receiving people, and emergency operations, it's hard to claim that everything is normal. Russia tries to show control, but the fire reveals the pressure. The most sensitive issue is the environmental and social impact. Reports mention dark rain, oily residues, and heavy air. After the previous attacks, residents reported a burning smell, black dirt on clothes, and signs of contamination along the coastal region. This turns Tuapse into more than just a war target. The city shows how Russian air defense failed to protect a crucial facility and how the population now feels. A conflict that the Kremlin had promised to keep far from daily life. This partial evacuation raises an uncomfortable question for Moscow. Why wait so long? When a refinery burns for days, when there's a risk of toxic smoke, and when residents are already pushing for evacuation, the public response needs to be quick. But Russia acted gradually, tried to control the narrative, and only later began to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. For a government that tries to project strength, Tuapse exposes its weakness. The fire is not just flames, it's political, logistical, and psychological wear and tear. While the Russian port was burning, another front in the crisis was unfolding in Romania. On April 25, 2026, drone fragments were found in the city of Galati and also in the Tuapse region after a new Russian wave against Ukraine. In Galati, there was damage to an electricity pole and to an adjacent building. Romanian authorities evacuated residents due to the risk of an explosive charge and summoned a Russian ambassador to protest. Romania is not on the front line, but it is right on the edge of the war, and every drone that falls there brings attention closer to NATO. The Russian response was even more serious. They sent a message that raised the alarm in Bucharest. It says that Romania, by participating in the delivery of weapons, ammunition, and equipment to Kyiv, would in fact be part of the conflict and should be aware of the possible consequences. In diplomatic language, that's a threat. Moscow not only denied responsibility, Moscow tried to intimidate a member of the Western Alliance. And that's when the situation becomes explosive. Russia is suffering attacks on its energy infrastructure, trying to put out fires that damage its image, and at the same time, it's becoming more hardline. Against Romania, the Kremlin seems to use external threats to compensate for internal vulnerability. Instead of explaining why drones are crossing the Black Sea region and leaving traces on Romanian territory, Moscow reverses the accusation and tries to turn the victim of the violation into the provocateur. It's a well-known maneuver. When the pressure increases, Russia escalates its rhetoric. Romania did not treat the case as a minor detail. The Romanian Ministry of Defense condemned the Russian actions and said they represent a new challenge to regional security and stability. In the Black Sea, 2 British fighter jets were also deployed on a reinforced air policing mission, as a sign that NATO is closely monitoring the situation. This does not mean a direct entry of the alliance into the war, but it shows that the line between incident and crisis is becoming thinner. A miscalculation can be costly. The Black Sea has become a high-risk corridor. On one side, Ukraine tries to cut Russian revenues by attacking oil, ports, and facilities used to support the war. On the other, Russia continues to launch drones against Ukraine. But some of these devices approach or fall near NATO territory. Caught in the middle are Romania, Moldova, Bulgaria, Turkey, and the region's maritime security as a whole. What happens in Tuapse doesn't just stay in Tuapse. What falls in Galat isn't just a piece of metal. Everything is connected. The crisis gains another layer with global oil, as Russia faces attacks on refineries. The Middle East is experiencing tension in the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States is increasing pressure on Iranian ports. This puts pressure on Tehran, but it also puts pressure on Moscow, because any oil shock affects war, sanctions, and alliances. It's in this environment that Russia tries to show strength, but faces fires in its own energy system. It's not just one city that's been hit, it's part of a larger sequence in which Russian oil facilities are no longer untouchable. Ukraine has realized that it doesn't need to win every meter on the front to create real costs for the Kremlin. It just needs to make it too expensive to keep the war going. Every refinery shut down and every damaged terminal pushes Moscow into a more defensive position. The threat against Romania also reveals the Kremlin's nervousness about the support network for Kyiv. Moscow knows that Ukraine depends on supply routes, intelligence, air defense, ammunition, and Western aid. That's why it tries to pressure neighboring nations that help Kyiv resist. But the threat against Bucharest may have the opposite effect. It could further unite the Western Alliance, strengthen air policing, and justify a larger military presence on the eastern flank. It tries to intimidate, but ends up showing that it feels under siege. The nuclear alert, mentioned by the director of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, reinforces the dangerous atmosphere. He stated that the risk of nuclear catastrophe has reached a level not seen since the Cold War, at a time when wars have returned to Europe and the Middle East, and the security mechanisms are under pressure. This warning comes at the same time as drones cross borders, refineries burn, ports come to a halt, energy becomes a political weapon, and major powers test limits. Moscow uses threats to hide weakness, but the situation shows something else. The war is taking an increasingly high toll, and Russia's rear area no longer seems as secure as the Kremlin wanted to make it appear. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and at the end check out the comments so you can be even more engaged with the community. Milson Alves News.